She served coffee at the airport diner every morning. Nobody suspected anything. When a Cessna started crashing outside the window, she ran to the counter and grabbed the microphone. Her calm voice giving expert instructions stunned everyone watching. The waitress hiding an incredible secret was about to save someone's life. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Riverside Municipal Airport, its golden light reflecting off rows of small aircraft parked along the flight line. Inside the Skyway Diner, the familiar sounds of breakfast service filled the air as coffee machines hissed, plates clinked, and conversations blended into a comfortable rhythm. The restaurant sat at the edge of the airport property, its large windows offering a perfect view of runways and taxiways where Cessnas, Pipers, and other small aircraft came and went throughout the day. Sarah Mitchell moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her black apron marked with coffee stains, her order pad tucked into her pocket as she refilled cups and delivered plates to pilots, flight instructors, and aviation enthusiasts who made the Skyway Diner their regular morning stop. At 42 years old, Sarah had worked at the diner for 3 years, and most customers knew her simply as the friendly waitress who remembered how they liked their coffee and always had a warm smile ready. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform consisting of black pants, a white shirt, and comfortable shoes designed for long shifts on her feet. The pilots who ate breakfast at her tables treated her with casual courtesy. People show to service workers, making pleasant small talk about weather or complimenting food while their conversations quickly returned to topics like flight training, aircraft maintenance, or weekend flying trips. They never asked Sarah about aviation topics, never imagined she might understand the technical discussions happening around her, and certainly never suspected that the woman pouring their coffee possessed more flying experience than most of them would accumulate in their entire lives. Nobody at the airport knew that Sarah had once been Captain Sarah Mitchell, a highly respected flight instructor with over 5,000 hours of flight time, an airline transport pilot license, and a reputation for being able to teach anyone to fly. She had owned a successful flight school at a larger airport 2 hours north, where she specialized in advanced training, instrument instruction, and emergency procedures that went far beyond basic private pilot skills. Her students had gone on to careers with major airlines, corporate flight departments, and military aviation programs. She had been recognized by the FAA with safety awards, had written articles for aviation magazines about emergency training techniques, and had developed specialized courses that other flight schools adopted. Her reputation extended throughout the region, with pilots traveling from neighboring states specifically to train with her because of her exceptional teaching methods and comprehensive understanding of aircraft systems. But that life had ended 3 years ago when her husband's sudden death from a heart attack left her with crushing medical debts, a mortgage she couldn't afford alone, and business loans she had no way to repay. The flight school had closed within 6 months, her aircraft sold to cover debts, and her instructor certificates had lapsed when she couldn't afford renewal fees or medical examinations. Sarah had left that airport and everything associated with her former life, eventually finding her way to Riverside and the only job that kept her close to aviation. Working as a waitress at an airport diner wasn't what she had imagined, but it allowed her to hear engines starting, watch aircraft take off and land, and maintain some connection to flying even if she could no longer afford to do it herself. Every morning when she tied her apron and picked up her order pad, she reminded herself that staying near aviation in any capacity was better than leaving it completely behind. The breakfast rush was in full swing that Tuesday morning as Sarah moved from table to table, taking orders and delivering food with efficient grace. At table 6, 3 student pilots hunched over sectional charts, planning a cross-country flight while discussing weather conditions and fuel calculations. Sarah refilled their coffee cups and smiled as they debated whether to fly direct or follow highways for easier navigation. At the counter, a corporate pilot ate his omelet while reviewing approach plates for an instrument flight, and near the window, a flight instructor explained weight and balance calculations to a nervous student struggling with the math. Sarah had learned to keep her aviation knowledge hidden, to play the role of the cheerful waitress who knew nothing about the technical world surrounding her. The morning continued its normal rhythm as Sarah cleared plates, wiped tables, and kept the coffee flowing. Through the diner's large windows, she watched a Cessna 172 taxi out for departure, its propeller spinning as the pilot performed the pre-takeoff checklist. Another Cessna sat at the fuel pumps while its owner topped off the tanks. The sight of these aircraft, so familiar and yet so distant from her current life, created a constant ache in Sarah's chest. She had once been intimately familiar with every system, every gauge, and every procedure associated with these planes. She had taught hundreds of students to handle engine failures, practice emergency descents, and recover from unusual attitudes in these exact aircraft models. Now she could only watch from behind a restaurant window. Around 10:30, Sarah noticed increased radio chatter coming from the small speaker mounted behind the counter. The diner kept one of the airport's handheld radios tuned to the tower frequency, allowing customers to listen to takeoffs and landings while they ate. Normally the transmissions were routine, but something in the controller's voice caught Sarah's attention. There was an edge to the transmission, a slight tension that most people wouldn't notice but that Sarah recognized immediately from her years of flight instruction. She paused while wiping down a table, listening more carefully as the tower controller attempted to contact an aircraft that wasn't responding properly. The controller's voice came through the speaker again, more insistent. Cessna 327 Mike Alpha, Riverside Tower, radio check, how do you read? There was a pause, then a garbled, stressed response that Sarah couldn't quite make out but that made her stomach tighten. The pilot's voice sounded wrong, the words unclear and the transmission weak. Sarah glanced toward the windows, scanning the sky for the aircraft in question, her trained eyes automatically searching the approach paths and traffic pattern. Several other customers noticed the unusual radio exchange, pilots looking up from their meals with curious expressions, but none of them seemed particularly alarmed. But Sarah heard something different in those transmissions. She heard the subtle indicators of a developing emergency, the kind of situation that started small but could escalate rapidly if not addressed properly. The tower controller made another attempt to contact the aircraft, and this time Sarah caught part of the pilot's response. The voice was definitely distressed, the words coming in fragments that suggested the pilot was dealing with multiple problems simultaneously. Sarah set down her coffee pot and moved closer to the radio, her attention now fully focused on the unfolding situation. The situation escalated quickly. Through the window, Sarah spotted the Cessna, a 172 model, about 2 miles out on what should have been a normal approach to the runway. But the aircraft's behavior was anything but normal. It was oscillating, the wings rocking back and forth in a manner that immediately told Sarah the pilot was struggling with control. The Cessna's nose was pitching up and down erratically, and even from this distance, Sarah could see the aircraft wasn't maintaining a stable attitude. Her heart rate increased as years of training and experience kicked in, her mind automatically analyzing what she was seeing. That wasn't turbulence. That was a pilot fighting with the controls, possibly dealing with a mechanical failure, possibly incapacitated, possibly both. The tower controller's voice became more urgent. Cessna 7 Mike Alpha, you appear to be having difficulty maintaining control. State the nature of your emergency. The response was barely intelligible, just broken words and what sounded like someone struggling to breathe or speak clearly. Sarah watched the Cessna continue its erratic approach, the aircraft now losing altitude faster than normal, the wings still rocking in a way that suggested serious control problems. Around her, the diner had gone quiet as other pilots noticed the distressed aircraft, several people standing to get a better view through the windows. The tower controller tried a different approach. 7 Mike Alpha, if you can hear me, rock your wings. The Cessna's wings waggled slightly, confirming the pilot could receive transmissions even if he couldn't respond clearly. Roger, I see your wing rock. If you're experiencing control difficulties, rock your wings again. Another weak wing rock confirmed the problem. The controller's voice remained professional but carried clear concern now. 7 Mike Alpha, emergency equipment is being notified. Continue your approach and try to maintain control. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as she watched the Cessna struggle. If the pilot was having medical issues, it meant incapacitation, possibly a heart attack or stroke preventing proper aircraft control. If the controls were jammed or failed, it meant mechanical problems making the aircraft nearly impossible to fly. Either scenario was critical, and from what she was seeing, the tower controller wasn't providing the specific guidance this pilot desperately needed. The controller was following standard emergency procedures, but those procedures assumed a pilot who was capable of normal flight operations with some assistance. What Sarah was witnessing suggested a pilot who was either barely conscious or fighting with controls that weren't responding properly, and neither situation would respond well to generic guidance. Sarah's years of experience allowed her to read the aircraft's behavior like a language most people couldn't understand. The way the wings were oscillating indicated the pilot was over-controlling, probably because the controls weren't responding predictably. The erratic pitch changes suggested either panic or mechanical resistance that was making smooth inputs impossible. The increasing descent rate meant the pilot was losing the battle, unable to maintain altitude while simultaneously trying to diagnose and fix whatever was wrong. Time was running out. At the current rate of descent and with the unstable flight path, the Cessna had perhaps 90 seconds before it would be too low and too out of control to recover. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she calculated the rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to intervene. The Cessna dropped another 100 feet, its nose pitching down sharply before the pilot managed to pull it back up, the aircraft now wallowing through the air in a barely controlled descent. Sarah knew that Cessna 172 like she knew her own hands. She had taught dozens of students to handle emergencies in that exact aircraft model. She knew its stall characteristics, its control responses, its systems, and most importantly, she knew the specific procedures that could save it when things went catastrophically wrong. The tower controller was doing his best, but he was providing generic emergency guidance when this situation called for precise, aircraft-specific procedures delivered by someone who truly understood what was happening. The Cessna's nose dropped again, more sharply this time, and Sarah saw the aircraft enter the beginning of a spiral. The wing on the left side rose while the right wing dropped, the nose pitching down into a descending turn that would become a spin if not corrected immediately. She had seen this exact situation dozens of times in her instructional career, had taught countless students how to recognize and recover from it, and she knew without doubt that if someone didn't provide specific guidance in the next 30 seconds, that aircraft and whoever was in it would die. Sarah made her decision in a heartbeat. She dropped her order pad on the nearest table and ran toward the counter where the diner kept its radio equipment. The airport manager, a regular customer named Tom who was eating his usual Tuesday morning breakfast, looked up in surprise as Sarah grabbed the handheld radio from its charging station. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. Several other pilots turned to stare at the waitress who was suddenly handling radio equipment like she knew what she was doing. Sarah ignored them all, switching the radio to the tower frequency and keying the microphone with the smooth confidence of someone who had made thousands of radio calls. Her voice cut through the emergency frequency with absolute authority, every trace of the friendly waitress gone, replaced by the calm, commanding tone of an experienced pilot talking another aviator through a crisis. "Cessna 327 Mike Alpha, this is an emergency instructor on Riverside ground frequency. I have you in sight and I'm going to talk you through this. Acknowledge with a wing rock if you can hear me clearly." The Cessna's wings rocked once, sharply, and Sarah continued without pause, her words flowing with the precision of someone who had guided pilots through emergencies many times before. "Good. Listen carefully and do exactly as I say. First, I need you to reduce your power to 1000 RPM immediately. Pull the throttle back smoothly but quickly. Do it now." The diner had gone completely silent, every person staring at Sarah with shock and disbelief. Tom's mouth hung open as he watched his waitress provide expert aviation guidance in a voice that carried absolute confidence and technical knowledge. The other pilots exchanged confused glances, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Through the window, they could all see the Cessna's erratic behavior continuing, but now someone was providing specific technical instructions in language that demonstrated deep understanding. 7 Mike Alpha, as soon as you reduce power, I want you to level your wings using coordinated aileron and rudder. If your controls feel stiff or jammed, use firm but smooth pressure. Don't fight them. Confirm power reduction with a wing rock. Sarah watched the Cessna's propeller slow slightly, indicating the pilot had followed her instruction, and the wings rocked to acknowledge compliance. Excellent. Now, your airspeed is too high and you're in a developing spiral. I need you to apply right aileron and right rudder pressure to roll the wings level. Use the horizon as your reference. The wing should align parallel with the ground. Don't pull back on the yoke yet. Just level the wings first. She continued the step-by-step guidance, her voice never wavering despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. As you apply the aileron and rudder, you'll feel the aircraft want to continue the spiral. That's normal. Maintain your control input until the wings are level. Don't rush it. Smooth, steady pressure. The Cessna slowly began to respond, the left wing lowering and the right wing rising as the pilot followed Sarah's instructions. The aircraft was still descending, still unstable, but the spiral was being arrested. Around Sarah, the pilots in the diner watched in stunned silence as the waitress they had known for 3 years demonstrated expertise that far exceeded most of their own. Tom finally found his voice, speaking quietly. "Sarah, how do you know how to do this?" She ignored the question, completely focused on the aircraft and the pilot who needed her guidance. 7 Mike Alpha, wings are coming level. Good job. Now I need you to assess your control feel. Are your controls responding normally, or do they feel stiff, loose, or jammed? If they're responding normally, rock your wings twice. If they feel abnormal, rock once. The Cessna's wings rocked a single time, confirming control problems. Sarah processed this information instantly, adjusting her guidance to account for mechanical issues. "Roger, I understand you have control problems. Here's what we're going to do. With power still at 1000 RPM and wings level, I want you to gently, very gently, apply back pressure on the yoke. Just enough to stop your descent. You're at 800 feet now, so we don't have much altitude to work with. Small movements only. If the controls fight you, don't force them." Sarah's knowledge of the Cessna 172's systems ran through her mind like a reference manual. If the controls were stiff or jammed, it could indicate a problem with the control cables, a jammed elevator system, or physical interference in the control mechanism. Whatever the cause, forcing the controls could make the situation worse. The Cessna's descent began to slow as the pilot followed Sarah's instructions. The nose came up slightly, reducing the rate at which the aircraft was falling. Sarah knew they weren't out of danger yet. The aircraft was still unstable, still experiencing control problems, and they were running out of altitude. 7 Mike Alpha, you're doing great. Descent is slowing. I need to know if you're experiencing any physical symptoms that are affecting your ability to fly. If you're having medical issues, rock your wings once. If you're physically okay but the aircraft has mechanical problems, rock twice. The Cessna's wings rocked twice, and Sarah felt relief mixed with concern. Relief that the pilot wasn't having a heart attack, concern because mechanical problems in a Cessna's control system could be extremely serious. Understood, mechanical issues only. Your controls are likely experiencing a problem with the cable system or possibly a jammed component. I'm going to guide you through a landing, but we need to prepare for the possibility that your controls won't respond normally during the flare. Are you familiar with emergency procedures for control problems? One wing rock indicated no. Listen carefully. The Cessna 172's most common control problems involve the elevator cables or the elevator itself. If your up and down control is compromised, we can work around it using power and trim. I'm going to have you increase power slightly to maintain level flight, then we'll use your trim wheel to control pitch. The trim wheel is between the seats. Find it now and confirm with a wing rock. The pilot took several seconds, presumably searching for the trim wheel, then rocked the wings. Sarah continued immediately. Perfect. Turn the trim wheel backward, toward you, very slowly. Count 3 complete turns and watch what happens to your nose. It should rise slightly. Do this now. Sarah watched the Cessna's attitude begin to change, the nose rising as the trim took effect. The aircraft's descent stopped completely, and for the first time since the emergency began, the Cessna appeared stable in flight. Behind her, she heard Tom speaking on his cell phone, presumably calling the tower. Several pilots had moved closer, listening intently to Sarah's guidance. Sarah continued her systematic approach. 7 Mike Alpha, excellent work on the trim. Your nose is up and you've stopped descending. We're going to use power and trim to fly this aircraft, keeping your hands light on the controls. I want you to add power slowly to 1,500 RPM. As you add power, the nose will want to rise more. Counter this by turning the trim wheel forward, away from you, just one turn. Nice and smooth. The Cessna's engine note increased slightly, and the aircraft began climbing slowly. Sarah allowed this, knowing they needed altitude before attempting a landing. You're climbing now at about 200 feet per minute. That's perfect. Maintain this configuration while I explain what we're going to do. The Riverside runway is runway 17, which means you'll be landing toward the south. The winds are currently light from the southwest at 5 knots, so you'll have a slight crosswind but nothing significant. I'm going to talk you through a long, straight-in approach that will minimize your need for control inputs. We'll use power to control your descent rate and trim to maintain your pitch attitude. The key is to make everything gradual and smooth. 2 wing rocks indicated understanding. One of the pilots standing near Sarah, a flight instructor named Mark, spoke quietly. Sarah, how do you know all this? Sarah glanced at him briefly. Later, she said simply, and Mark nodded. The other pilots continued watching, some recording the event on their phones, others just standing in silent amazement. Sarah keyed the microphone again. 7 Mike Alpha, I want you to turn left to a heading of about 130. This will position you for a long straight-in approach. Turn very gently using rudder only. Don't use your ailerons. Just apply gentle left rudder pressure and let the aircraft slowly turn. The turn will take a while, but that's okay. We have time now. The Cessna began a slow, shallow turn to the left, the pilot following Sarah's instructions exactly. A turn using only rudder was unorthodox, but it was the safest option when the aileron controls were suspect. As the Cessna continued its gentle turn, Sarah explained the landing procedure. When you're lined up with the runway, you'll be about 3 miles out at about 1,000 feet. That's a perfect position for a long, stabilized approach. I'll tell you exactly when to reduce power and how much. You'll use trim to maintain a descent of about 300 feet per minute. That's slower than normal but much safer given your control problems. As we get close to the ground, I'll guide you through the flare using power and trim together. The landing will probably be firm, but we're going to make sure it's survivable. The tower controller, who had been silent during Sarah's emergency guidance, came back on frequency. Aircraft providing emergency assistance to Cessna 327 Mike Alpha, please identify yourself and state your qualifications. Sarah keyed the microphone. Riverside Tower, this is Sarah Mitchell, formerly Captain Sarah Mitchell, airline transport pilot, certified flight instructor with instrument and multi-engine ratings, 5,000 flight hours total time with 3,000 hours as an instructor. I'm currently on the ground at the Skyway Diner with visual contact on the emergency aircraft. I have the pilot stabilized and am coordinating his approach and landing. There was a long pause before the controller responded. Roger, Sarah Mitchell. Be advised emergency equipment is standing by. Continue your assistance. Tower is monitoring. Tom stood next to Sarah now, his expression a mixture of confusion and respect. Sarah, I've known you for 3 years. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Sarah kept her eyes on the Cessna. Because I'm not a pilot anymore, Tom. I lost everything 3 years ago. My husband died, my business collapsed, and I couldn't afford to keep my certificates current. I'm just a waitress now. Or I was until about 5 minutes ago. The Cessna was now lined up with the runway, about 3 miles out and at 900 feet. Sarah began the final phase of her guidance. 7 Mike Alpha, you're perfectly aligned with runway 17. I need you to reduce power to 1000 RPM now, and as the nose wants to drop, turn your trim wheel forward 1 turn to maintain your current pitch attitude. This will start a gentle descent. Watch your airspeed. You want to maintain 70 to 75 knots. If the speed increases above 75, turn the trim wheel back 1 click. If it decreases below 70, turn it forward 1 click. The Cessna's engine note decreased and the aircraft began descending, its approach angle shallow but steady. Sarah monitored every aspect of the aircraft's flight path. The descent rate looked good at about 300 feet per minute. The airspeed appeared stable. The wings remained level. Everything was progressing exactly as planned, but Sarah knew the real test would come during the final seconds before touchdown. You're doing beautifully, Sarah told the pilot. Descent rate is perfect, speed is good, alignment is centered. You're going to make this landing. In about 60 seconds, when I tell you, I want you to add power to 1200 RPM and simultaneously turn the trim wheel backward 2 full turns. This will raise your nose and slow your descent just before the wheels touch. The timing has to be precise. I'll count you down. The Cessna continued its approach, passing through 500 feet, then 400, descending steadily toward the runway. Sarah could see emergency vehicles positioned along the taxiway. Everyone in the diner watched in complete silence. Pilots who had eaten breakfast here for years now watched Sarah guide an aircraft to safety with expertise most of them could only aspire to achieve. Tom stood with his hand on Sarah's shoulder, no longer seeing his waitress but recognizing the accomplished aviator she had been and clearly still was. The tension in the room was palpable as the Cessna dropped through 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. 100 feet, you're perfect. 75 feet. 50 feet. Now. Add power to 1200 and pull the trim wheel back 2 turns. The Cessna's nose began to rise, the descent slowing dramatically as the pilot executed Sarah's instructions exactly. The aircraft floated above the runway for several seconds, bleeding off speed and settling gradually. The main wheels touched first with a moderately firm impact, not gentle but far from dangerous, and the nose wheel came down a moment later. The pilot kept the aircraft rolling straight, gradually reducing power until the Cessna slowed to taxiing speed. Emergency vehicles raced toward the aircraft, but it was immediately clear they wouldn't be needed. Spontaneous applause erupted in the diner as pilots and customers celebrated the successful outcome. Sarah set down the radio with hands that finally began to shake, the adrenaline manifesting as tremors she couldn't control. Tom pulled her into a hug. Sarah, that was incredible. You saved that person's life. Other pilots crowded around, offering congratulations, their earlier skepticism completely evaporated. Mark shook his head in amazement. Sarah, I've been instructing for 15 years, and I couldn't have provided better guidance. The way you diagnosed the problem and communicated the procedures was masterful. Sarah managed a weak smile. Thank you. I just did what needed to be done. That pilot deserves the credit. He stayed calm and followed instructions perfectly. The airport manager's voice came over the radio. Skyway Diner, we need to speak with Sarah Mitchell immediately regarding the emergency assistance. Can she come to the tower? Tom answered. We'll send her right over. He turned to Sarah. Go talk to the tower and make sure everything is handled. Then come back because we need to have a serious conversation about your future. Sarah walked to the tower building, her legs feeling weak after the tension. The tower controller, a man named Dave who she knew from the diner, met her at the door with profound respect. Sarah, that was the most impressive emergency assistance I've ever witnessed. The pilot, his name is Robert Chen, is meeting with paramedics now. He's shaken but physically fine. He says the control yoke suddenly became very stiff about 10 minutes into his flight. He was barely able to move it. When you came on the radio, he says it was like having a guardian angel. He wants to thank you personally. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes, the emotional impact finally breaking through her professional composure. I'm just glad he's okay. Is there any indication what caused the control problem? Dave nodded. The mechanic found that a bolt in the elevator control linkage had worked loose, causing the elevator to bind. Robert was essentially trying to fly with controls that were almost completely jammed. Without your guidance, he wouldn't have made it. They talked for a while longer, Dave explaining that the FAA would need a statement and that there would likely be media attention. When Sarah finally left the tower and walked back toward the diner, she saw a crowd had gathered outside, pilots and airport staff who wanted to see the woman who had pulled off the rescue. She felt uncomfortable with the attention, unsure how to respond to people who yesterday had seen her only as someone who served their food. Robert Chen stood among the crowd, a young man in his 30s. When he saw Sarah, he stepped forward with gratitude and awe. Sarah Mitchell. I'm Robert. I'm the pilot you saved. I thought I was going to die. When my controls stopped working, I panicked. And then your voice came over the radio, so calm and confident, telling me exactly what to do. You saved my life. Sarah found herself embraced by a stranger who was crying, and she hugged him back. You did the hard part, Robert. You kept flying and you trusted me even though you had no idea who I was. Tom finally broke up the crowd, steering Sarah back into the diner where most customers still waited. He sat across from her in a booth. Sarah, I need you to explain something. You've worked here for 3 years. Not once did you mention you were a highly qualified pilot and instructor. Why? Sarah stared at her hands. Tom, when my husband died, my whole world collapsed. I lost my business, my aircraft, my home, and my career all within a few months. I came here because I needed a job and because I couldn't completely leave aviation behind. But I didn't tell anyone about my background because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd failed, ashamed that I'd gone from being a successful instructor to serving breakfast. I thought people would judge me or pity me. So I kept quiet and tried to pretend my old life never existed. Tom leaned back. Sarah, what happened today proves you still have all your skills and ability. You saved a man's life because you're an exceptional pilot and instructor, not because you're a good waitress. Though you are a good waitress. But we both know that's not what you should be doing. Sarah shook her head. Tom, I appreciate that, but I can't afford to be a pilot anymore. My certificates have lapsed. I don't have the money for renewal fees, medical exams, flight reviews. I can barely afford rent. Flying is expensive, and I'm broke. Today was a one-time thing. Tomorrow I'll go back to being a waitress because that's the only option I have. Tom smiled. Actually, I don't think that's true anymore. While you were in the tower, I got 3 phone calls. The first was from the flight school here. They want to hire you as an instructor immediately, pending paperwork to get your certificates reinstated. They'll cover all costs for renewals, medicals, whatever you need. The second call was from Robert Chen's father, who owns a successful tech company. He wants to pay for whatever you need to get back into aviation as thanks for saving his son. The third call was from a local news station wanting to do a story. Sarah, whether you like it or not, your secret is out, and people are lining up to help you. Sarah sat in stunned silence. 3 years of struggling, of accepting that her flying career was over, and suddenly doors were opening that she had thought permanently closed. Tom, I don't know what to say. This is overwhelming. What if I can't do it anymore? What if today was just luck? Mark stepped forward. Sarah, I watched you handle that emergency with expertise I rarely see even among experienced instructors. The way you diagnosed the problem, developed a solution, and supported the pilot was absolutely professional. You weren't rusty. You weren't lucky. You were brilliant. I'd be honored to have you as a colleague, and I know our students would benefit enormously from your experience. Please don't let fear keep you from returning to where you belong." Other pilots gathered around, adding encouragement. Someone mentioned that the aviation community took care of its own. Another pilot offered to let her use his aircraft for practice. A student pilot spoke up, saying she wanted Sarah to be her instructor because anyone who could handle that crisis could obviously teach flying better than anyone else. The overwhelming support brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she realized these people were rallying around her without judgment, only respect. Robert Chen returned with an older man who was clearly his father. The elder Mr. Chen introduced himself and spoke with deep sincerity. "Miss Mitchell, my son tells me you saved his life today using skills you've been hiding while working as a waitress. I cannot adequately express my gratitude, but I can take action. I've already contacted the FAA about expediting your certificate renewals. I've arranged for you to see an aviation medical examiner this week. I will personally cover any and all costs associated with getting you back into aviation. Consider it a small repayment for ensuring my son survived." The afternoon passed in a blur. The local news station arrived and conducted an interview. The flight school director came to discuss employment, offering Sarah a position as a senior instructor with a salary that exceeded what she had earned before. As the sun began setting, Sarah stood outside watching aircraft take off and land on the runway where Robert Chen had made his emergency landing hours earlier. Tom joined her. "So, I guess this means you'll be giving me your resignation as a waitress?" Sarah turned to him with a genuine smile, the first truly happy expression he had seen in 3 years. "I guess it does. Thank you, Tom, for giving me a job when I needed it and for being understanding. You gave me a safe place to land when my life fell apart." Tom waved away her thanks. "You earned every paycheck, Sarah. You were a great waitress. But I have a feeling you're going to be an even better flight instructor. The aviation world is lucky to have you back." They shook hands, acknowledging the end of their employer-employee relationship and the beginning of something new. Sarah looked around the diner one last time, seeing the tables she had waited on for 3 years, the counter where she had poured countless cups of coffee, and the windows that had allowed her to maintain her connection to aviation. This place had been her refuge and her prison, allowing her to stay close to flying while constantly reminding her of what she had lost. The following weeks transformed Sarah's life completely. Her medical certificate was renewed after examination found her in excellent health. Her flight instructor certificates were reinstated after she demonstrated her knowledge and skills remained sharp. The flight school provided her with an office, students eager to learn from the instructor who had become locally famous, and a supportive community of fellow instructors. Sarah discovered that her skills hadn't diminished. If anything, the years of loss and struggle had given her deeper appreciation for flying and greater ability to empathize with students who faced their own challenges. Her first student was Robert Chen himself, who wanted Sarah to help him overcome the trauma. She guided him through careful rebuilding of confidence, starting with simple flights and gradually working up to challenging conditions. Robert proved dedicated, and under Sarah's instruction, he became far more competent than before. Other students followed, drawn by word of mouth and news stories about the waitress who had saved a crashing aircraft. Sarah's schedule filled quickly, and she found herself working harder than in years, but it was work she loved. The aviation community embraced her return enthusiastically. Pilots who had watched her guide Robert to safety told and retold the story, each retelling adding to Sarah's reputation as an instructor who combined exceptional technical knowledge with remarkable calm under pressure. The video recordings that several pilots had made during the emergency went viral on aviation forums and social media, with experienced pilots and instructors analyzing her technique and praising her systematic approach to the crisis. Flight schools at other airports contacted her about conducting seminars on emergency procedures and crisis management. Aviation magazines requested interviews about her unique perspective on overcoming career setbacks and maintaining professional expertise during years away from active practice. The story resonated particularly with pilots who had faced their own career interruptions, whether from economic downturns, medical issues, or personal circumstances, and Sarah found herself receiving messages from around the country thanking her for demonstrating that aviation skills and passion could survive even the most difficult circumstances. Sarah handled the attention gracefully, always emphasizing that her story was about the importance of aviation expertise and never giving up on dreams, regardless of how impossible the path back might seem. 6 months after the emergency, Sarah stood in front of a classroom of student pilots, teaching a ground school lesson on emergency procedures. The students listened with rapt attention as she explained principles of maintaining aircraft control when systems failed, using real examples from her years of instruction and describing the day she talked a pilot through an emergency landing from a diner counter. She demonstrated how proper training, systematic thinking, and calm communication could overcome situations that seemed impossible. After class, a young woman approached nervously. "Instructor Mitchell, can I ask something personal? I heard your story, about how you lost everything and had to work as a waitress for years. I'm struggling to afford flight training. My family thinks I should give up. But flying is what I love. How did you keep going when everything seemed lost?" Sarah smiled, recognizing herself in this struggle. "You stay close to it however you can. You read aviation magazines, watch aircraft, talk to pilots, study procedures, and never let yourself believe that circumstances define your identity. I worked as a waitress, but I never stopped being a pilot in my heart. I knew one day an opportunity would come. And when that moment arrived, I was ready because I had maintained my knowledge and skills. Your circumstances right now don't determine your future. Your dedication, your persistence, and your refusal to give up determine your future. Keep studying, keep training at whatever pace you can afford, and trust that if you maintain your commitment, opportunities will come." The student's eyes brightened with renewed determination, and she thanked Sarah before leaving with improved confidence. Sarah gathered her teaching materials, feeling deep satisfaction that came from using her expertise to help others achieve their aviation dreams. This was what she had always been meant to do, and the years away had only strengthened her appreciation for the privilege of teaching people to fly. She thought about the twist of fate that had exposed her secret and transformed her life, recognizing that sometimes the most profound changes come from unexpected moments when circumstances force you to reveal who you truly are. As she walked to her car that evening, Sarah passed the Skyway Diner, its windows glowing warmly. She could see Tom inside, managing dinner with the new waitress hired to replace Sarah. She smiled, grateful for the 3 years she had spent there, grateful for the refuge it had provided during her darkest time, and grateful that circumstances had finally allowed her to return to the career she loved. The diner had been a waiting room between her old life and her new one, a place where she could maintain her connection to aviation while rebuilding her strength. The memory of that morning would stay with her forever, the sight of the struggling Cessna, the decision to grab the radio, the surprised faces watching as she demonstrated skills they never suspected she possessed. It had been terrifying and exhilarating, heartbreaking and triumphant, an ending and a beginning compressed into 20 minutes of crisis. Sarah had lost much in her life, had struggled through years of hardship, but she had never lost the most important thing, her identity as a pilot and instructor, her deep knowledge of aviation, and her commitment to using that expertise to help others. Those qualities had remained hidden beneath her waitress uniform for 3 years, invisible to everyone around her, but they had never disappeared. They had simply been waiting for the moment when they were needed most, when someone's life depended on her willingness to step forward and reveal who she truly was. That moment had come, and Sarah had answered, saving a life and reclaiming her own in the process.